I've had the pleasure of serving as Deputy Director at Carroll, Oklahoma for the past 2 years. Prior to that, working with clients who experienced the religious discrimination and harassment. And our Muslim community, as well as our Jewish friends and neighbors, understand that bystander intervention has never been more important. We do not have to sit passively by when community members and our loved ones and friends and family members are being attacked. And so this training is intended to give you some background on what the bystander effect is and what it is not, as well as some tools and tricks that might help you to intervene in a variety of settings and use the tools that you have at your disposal as an individual. I'm going to have you take just a moment, pull out any device that you have with you, and scan this QR code for a pre-training survey. Because this is the first time that I have debuted this particular training module, I would really like to understand where we're getting started in terms of our familiarity with bystander training and where we will end up at the end of my time with you today. So I'll give you a few minutes to take this survey. It shouldn't take very long. And if you have any tech issues, you can let me know. But I'd like for us to just get a sense of our baselines individually as we get started. And then we will reevaluate at the end of the day kind of where we feel that we have made it. So what we're going to talk about is, again, the bystander effect, some historical and social and psychological context, the background and the history of our own understanding of our own brains when it comes to the bystander effect, how and why people will intervene and why they will not. We'll then talk through the 5 Ds of intervention strategies. These have been developed, clinically tested, evaluated to be the 5 most effective methods of bystander training. So we'll talk through each one in detail, and I'll give you some examples of how you can use them. Then I want to talk through some digital bystander training. We all know that we are spending a lot of our time online and in online spaces, and we also know that online can be not always the friendliest place for some of us to be spending just tons of our mental energy and our time. So I want to talk about making a safer and healthier online culture for every aspect of our community. And then we'll have a note on interpersonal relationships. I'm sure all of us have been in interpersonal relationships where we hear somebody, maybe a friend or a family member, a colleague, a coworker, who says something that's hurtful or harmful, and we cringe in the moment because we just don't know how to address it. Well, good news, we're going to talk through some strategies for how to address harmful behavior, harassment, hurtful words when you know the individuals who are involved rather than they are strangers. And then we have plenty of time for conversation, questions, and answers. I will be available, and I'm easy to find, I'm easy to reach. If you have any question that you would rather not ask in front of the group, that's totally fine. I am easy to get a hold of at any point after today's training. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with what the bystander effect is. It's also known as bystander apathy, but it is a social psychological theory that kind of tries to explain why individuals are less or more likely to help when they see a person who is being victimized by another person. So if a single individual is asked to take action, they're more likely to do so. But when there's other people around and that responsibility becomes diffused, they are statistically less likely to take effect. And this was studied in the wake of a very highly publicized murder case that happened in the 1960s. This is the murder of Kitty Genovese. You might be familiar with this, so we're going to talk about it. So in March of 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was brutally and violently murdered on her way home from work. It was a long attack. It took over half an hour for her to eventually expire. And after her murder, Winston Moseley was arrested and charged, and he was convicted of not this murder, but other murders that he'd confessed to, and he did die in prison in 2016. So following Kitty Genovese's murder, the New York Times ran a story claiming that 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens had watched Kitty be murdered and do nothing. And this caused a huge uproar, both in the Queens community where Kitty Genovese lived, but throughout the country, the idea that over 36 New Yorkers could watch a violent murder and take no actions. That's the story that a lot of us have heard about Kitty Genovese, but there's some more context that's been uncovered 50 years later from Kitty Genovese's death. What we also know, in addition to those very bare facts as reported by the New York Times, is that Kitty was a bar manager at a sports bar who was living with her girlfriend at the time. And that when she was first attacked, a neighbor did take action. A neighbor did yell out the window and cause her attacker to run away. although the attacker did then return. And Kitty had made her way around to the back of her apartment building where she was out of sight of anybody, right? So it's not that she was in plain broad daylight with people perhaps like walking by or seeing her. She had moved to a place where she was not clearly visible and also not clearly audible. So we also know that this was a time before the 911 citywide or national emergency system had been implemented. So what happened in those times is that instead of being able to call a centralized 911 hotline, people had to call the station that was local to their neighborhood or their community. And so that means that you had to know that station's phone number and be able and comfortable to reach them at that time. And so we do actually know that 2 people did call the local station when they heard Kitty being attacked the first time. We also know that there was a neighbor who did witness the attack and who was advised by other neighbors to stay out of the issue. And I'll talk more about him in just a moment. But it's really important too that we found out that Kitty did not pass alone. Another neighbor named Sophia found her, yelled for neighbors to call the police because at that point her voice was not audible. Kitty's voice was not audible. So Sophia yelled for the neighbors to call the police. And she said in her obituary, Sophia is said to have held Kitty in her arms as they were waiting for the ambulance to arrive. And so that provides some more context to what we know about Kitty's murder. There was a lot of anxiety about what it meant to be living in a big city. There was a lot of tension about race relations because Kitty was a white woman and her murderer happened to be a black man. There was also a lot of latent homophobia that Kitty and her neighbors had to deal with. At least one witness, the one who was told by his neighbors to stay out of it, he was openly gay at a time when many people who were LGBTQ in this community were not comfortable calling the police. They were often subject to harassment by both the police and also members of their broader community. And so that might have created some reluctance to call the police and be involved in something like this. We also know that in the wake of Kitty's murder, Kitty's girlfriend was questioned for 6 hours in a really invasive, what she recalled later as a very invasive series of questions that kind of detailed on their intimate life, not on what had happened to Kitty on her way home from work. The case might just have kind of passed under the radar as another really sad incident in New York's history, except that her murderer also confessed to a number of murders, some of which he did not actually commit, and another man who had been arrested around that same time period did also confess to Kitty's murder. And so there was some kind of tension and there was some excitement in the news cycle about the fact that 2 men had confessed to committing the same murder. So overall, Americans were very primed to believe stories that urban violence was more likely than violence in other parts of the country, and Americans were more primed to believe that 38 people could watch a murder and do nothing because of all of this other social and historical context that was swirling around at the same time as Kitty Genovese's murder. And so this outrage that was created, that was fostered by the way the story was told, spurred researchers to understand more about why people might not have chosen to act in support of Kitty, why they would not have chosen to take action, to call the police, to stop her murder. There were lots and lots of speculations about, oh, well, I would have done this, or I just know if it had been me, I would have acted this way. And that's really, really common in the wake of an incident where harm occurs, right? We always like to sort of play that, what's it called, the second-day quarterback, right? We're always thinking, what would we have done in that situation? But researchers wanted to understand what did actually go through people's minds. And so this is where the study of the bystander intervention theory, or bystander apathy theory, kind of emerged. So although a lot of the essential facts surrounding Kitty Genovese's murder were misreported, right, or were reported without the context that makes them meaningful, it still opened us up to wonder what makes us feel identification with someone who is a victim of harassment, what makes us feel more identified with someone who is experiencing harm, and thus what makes us more or less likely to take action in any given situation. So Darlene Latan's research, I won't go into this because people spend, entire PhD degrees trying to better understand this particular body of psychological research. But they've identified some steps in intervention in which bystanders they have the choices to take action, right? Noticing that something is wrong. If you are in a situation and no one around you is reacting to that situation, no one is acting like that's a problem, you are less likely to respond to that situation, to read that as an issue, as a problem. The second is, do you feel personally responsible? Do you define this situation as an emergency, right? A lot of people might have responded to what was going on with Kitty as, was this just a lover's quarrel, right? Was this an interpersonal relationship gone wrong that they felt, it's none of my business, I'd better stay out of that. So they may not have recognized her first initial cries for help as what they were. They might have read those as just being two people who were fighting with each other and not felt that that was emergent enough to get involved. A third point is that they don't feel, whether or not you feel personally responsible. And why I think we're all here in this training today is that we do feel some sense of personal responsibility for the community that we live in. What this training is designed to do is to foster that sense of community and investment in community that does make us feel personally responsible to intervene in support of someone who is experiencing harm. Also, knowing how to offer assistance is a huge reason that people say they didn't intervene or they didn't feel like they could intervene when they witnessed a situation of harassment or bullying or victimization. And so good thing we are here today to talk about how to offer assistance, because this is one of the major points that tends to stop people from intervening. And then they make a decision to help and feel like they can act on it. This again comes to, I think, a sense of personal empowerment. A lot of times people will report that they had seen or witnessed or just been around a situation where someone else was being harassed, being bullied, was being subjected to someone else's hurtful behavior, and they felt helpless. They did not feel a sense of empowerment to take action, and so that has a detrimental effect on our psyche. That has a detrimental effect on our own mental health when we feel like we are not empowered to take action in service of the other members of our community, of our neighbors, our family, our friends, our networks. And so being able to act on this decision to help is not only something that helps a targeted person, it also helps us to feel more secure in our roles, in our families, in our communities, in our networks, in our friend circles, in our workplaces, in when you're in the airport and someone is behaving really poorly, right? You don't have to sit there and feel like, oh my gosh, I just have to watch this happen and there's nothing that I can do. Which I know the airport is just a place that none of us probably feel great in airports. This is also information that will make you feel a little bit more secure in any of these given situations. So we know that this is also not, this is informed by like unconscious cognitive processes. People don't make active decisions to put themselves in a feeling of helplessness, right? And so we looked at, in 2014, a study actually looked at neural functions at the centers of the brain that lit up under certain circumstances, and they found that neural function actually did decrease in the brain when 2 or more other bystanders were present in a simulated situation of harassment. We also know that personality qualities, some of which are innate and some of which are the product of our socialization and our environment, that also may influence the likelihood of whether or not we are going to take action when we see someone being harmed. And so all this to say, I don't want anyone to feel bad if you have witnessed a situation of harassment or bullying and you didn't take action, because it was your brain doing what brains do. And we don't always have control over what brains do. What we're trying to talk about today is we're going to rewire some of those things that are part of cognitive process, and we're going to get ourselves to a point where all of those 5 things that Darlie and Latan looked at, we can prime ourselves to find in those 5 things the place of action for each individual. And so all of these things affect our decisions and our unconscious processes that prime our decisions of whether or not to act if we witness public harassment or bullying, right? The sense of, if others around me aren't reacting, is this a problem, right? If no one else is acting like the building is on fire, is the building really on fire? Do we feel the most similarity to the victim or to the perpetrator? I know it can be really difficult to intervene when the person who is perpetuating a harmful behavior looks a lot like us, but that does not absolve us from like our responsibility of being good community members, even when we have to overcome that similarity, right? The consequences for intervention, like fear of being judged, and we'll talk about that in just a minute in kind of a humorous context, but it is important for us to recognize, like, what is the biggest consequence of bystander intervention? It might be embarrassing, right? It might be uncomfortable, but what is the long-term ramifications of a community where nobody intervenes and we just let harmful behaviors continue? I won't read all of these necessarily, but these are definitely tested factors that have been proven to weigh in on whether or not we will take action as bystanders. So why we should intervene, now that we've understood a little bit of what causes us not to intervene, why should we take on the responsibility of being active bystanders? Why should we take on the responsibility of protecting strangers from attack by other strangers? Well, we can prevent harm and trauma that's caused to that person, right? We can teach the people around us that our community is one built on safety, mutual respect, and empathy, and that we don't tolerate harmful, hurtful, harassing behavior. We are showing other people, especially those of us who have young people who look up to us, maybe siblings or children, maybe we're teachers or mentors for other young people, we can model for those young minds what an active community member looks like and how an active community member does or does not tolerate harmful things that happen. And then I think the really essential, like, core function of bystander intervention is it's on us to create the world that we want to see. We can sit passively and think, oh, I really wish that more people would do X, but where does that wishing go if we are not willing to take that first step for ourselves and for the people around us? And so it's on us to create a world that we want to live in. So why this training and trainings like it really work is that it primes us to notice things as harassment, right? It helps us overcome that effect where if no one else is reacting, then we don't react. It helps us to overcome that. We're then more primed to notice just what's going on around us in the world. We do start to feel personally responsible for taking the steps that help benefit everyone in the community. And then we have the tools to do it effectively and safely based on whatever particular skills, experience, expertise, what our individual superpower might be. We learn how to identify more with a targeted person so that we do, again, feel that affiliation, that similarity with a victim or a person who's experiencing harassment. And so that also enables us to overcome that reluctance that might naturally be present in our brains. And overall, we just make our community safer. We're acting out against prejudice, discrimination, and bigotry, wherever it occurs and whomever it is targeting. And overall, we become a safer, healthier, better community. So I really think that this is a funny example of bystander intervention. So in this story, if you don't really understand, it's not super clear. In this situation, a woman is at the gym and she notices a man going up to another woman on an exercise machine and kind of making some harassing comments, saying, "Hey girl, you look so good in those leggings. Can I take you out sometime?" And this bystander chooses to intervene in that situation. She chooses to address the woman and say, "Hey, you ready to get out of here?" Because she feels like it's her responsibility to step in and intervene and protect another woman at the gym. Well, it turns out that the guy is actually the woman's boyfriend. And so he's doing this to be funny. And so they clearly know each other. It is not the same situation that she might have interpreted. But, girl, I appreciate you. Even though I was not being the subject of harassment the way that you thought, I appreciate that you stepped in to do that for a stranger. That's huge. And this story was tweeted and retweeted. It went viral. It became this huge thing because a lot of people were responding, I would have been so embarrassed. I would have been so humiliated if I'd intervened and it turned out that, they were boyfriend and girlfriend and it wasn't a real thing. But is that momentary embarrassment worse than knowing someone could have been hurt, right? And so I think that this is, although it's funny, it's presented in a very humorous way, I think this is a great example of how we keep each other safe, right? So, moving into the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, I want to give you a few disclaimers. I'm a lawyer. My brain really likes disclaimers. It likes caveats. So we're going to start with that. But bystander intervention strategies are predicated on a few key things. One is that you do not know the perpetrator or the targeted person. So this is specifically for stranger-on-stranger harassment, bullying, or violence, okay? It's also predicated on whether or not your safety is at immediate risk. We are not ever asking anyone to step in front of a bullet for another people or to die for another person. That is not what we are here to do. What we are here to do is to maybe disrupt, deflect, de-escalate. We are not asking someone to put themselves in danger in the course of carrying out bystander intervention strategies. So I want to be very clear about that. And so that all requires you to be able to read the situation and make the best judgment for yourself at that time. And then, of course, this is an act of public bullying, harassment, or targeting. If this is happening in a different context, such as in your home or at work or online, we'll talk through different strategies. But these specific instances are what we are talking about. This is what bystander intervention is specifically developed for. That's what this training is specifically developed for. And so we're going to use your best judgment in any given incident that we witness in order to decide which strategy is right for you. So I want to be really clear about kind of both the power of this training and also that there are some limitations and that things will shift a little bit in different situations. So the 5 Ds of bystander intervention: direct, distract, delegate, document, and delay. And if you feel like it's going to be really difficult to remember all 5 of these, do not worry, because I have up here some business cards that outline the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, along with examples for each one of the Ds that you see here. So do not worry, I do not expect you to memorize this slide, although the more you look at these things and practice them and think them through, the more familiar they will become to you. So to get started with direct, this is probably, this is the first D because I think it is the most like one-on-one, the most close to confrontational of the bystander intervention strategies. This is where you would step in and you would speak directly to the person who is doing the harassment, not arguing with them, but being short, sharp, and succinct to tell them, hey, that's not okay. You need to stop or leave them alone. Very crucial here in the direct form of intervention, you are not there to argue. You're not there to give that person another sounding board for whatever hateful things that they might be saying. You are not there to get physically involved with this harassing person. You are there to repeat these words, these very short phrases: you need to stop, you need to go, until they back down and they cease the harassing behavior. So this is the direct intervention strategy. And I fully recognize, as a 5'1" Asian woman, that this is not a strategy that is easily and readily available to just everybody. That is okay. That is totally fine. If you are kind of like a big, bulky, masculine type person and you feel comfortable doing direct, awesome, more power to you. That is your superpower. But we do also need to acknowledge that this is not something that is readily available to every single person. And so, good news, there are 4 other Ds in our intervention strategies that do not involve you being willing to square up to someone who's committing bullying behavior in this fashion. It is effective if you do not argue, if you repeat these phrases or phrases like them, if you do not engage in conversation back and forth with a harasser, but you are just saying, nope, we're not doing that here, it's not okay, you need to go. So that is the direct strategy of bystander intervention. Distract is one that's often much more available to a wider segment of the community. So this is where you are drawing attention away from a harasser or away from a targeted person, giving that targeted person the opportunity to exit the situation, to get out of there, to get to safety. And so what you can often do is you can start a new conversation with the targeted person about something completely unrelated to the harasser. Often this might involve you like physically putting yourself in between a harasser and a targeted person, or even just kind of physically trying to draw attention to yourself rather than the targeted person. So you can ask them, oh my gosh, crazy weather we're having, so windy out here, right? Or you can say, I love that scarf that you have on. Where did you get that? I just love that color on you. I would love to talk to you some more about that beautiful scarf that you're wearing somewhere else, like maybe over here, right? You could also distract by doing something theatrical. So if you are like a theater kid, you've got background in acting, this is a great opportunity for you to bring out your acting chops. You can drop something really light. Oh my gosh, look at the mess that I just made. I've spilled my coffee all over everybody. Oh, I'm so clumsy. I just can't believe it. This exaggerated, kind of attention drawing thing that then gives the targeted person the opportunity to maybe escape that situation and get away. You can ask the targeted person like a question that only they can answer. A lot of times what I've seen happen is approach a targeted person and say, hey, it's so good to see you. You know, I saw your aunt at church just the other day and she looked like she was doing so good. Do you want to come and talk to her or talk to me about your aunt and your uncle and your whole family? Tell me your whole life story over here. We're going to go over here, somewhere else. We're going to go to a different place where it's maybe not so loud and we can hear each other talk. You do not actually have to know that person's auntie or their uncle or their family. You do not even have to particularly need to know their life story. The key here is that you are distracting. You are a distraction so that ceases the harasser, that stops them from being able to continue to target that person, and it gives a targeted person a safe way to escape this situation. So distract is a very common method that is often more available to people who witness these public acts of harassment or bullying. It does often, again, it does kind of require you to put yourself out there. But again, as we talked about, the fear of embarrassment should not outweigh our community obligation to protect each other and keep each other safe. You may also delegate, right? You can find someone who is in a position of power who is primed to help, or you can look at someone who is around you who is also witnessing harassing behavior and clue them in on their need to help. What we have found is that when you are asking another person to join you in intervention, it is most effective if you can name that person specifically. For example, hey, friend over here in the green jacket, I would really love if you wouldn't mind running up to the manager's desk and just telling them there's something going on the parking lot. See, right? What I've done there is I've created an individual relationship between you and me, and we are now intervenors together. It's not just me and it's not just you. We are now a team. So it often works better when you can identify a person around you, ask them to take a specific action, rather than a generic, hey, somebody needs to help, somebody do something. Very important that we try to maximize efficiency here in a very short amount of time, tagging someone in with what you want them specifically to do. So an important note here is the guidance is to only call the police if the targeted person has specifically requested that we do that. And the reason for that is there are many people in our community who, for various reasons, do not feel the safest when the police are called to these situations. A targeted person might be, they might be very stressed, they might have experienced trauma, they may not be acting their best self in the moment, because these situations often don't bring out just like the best in our public behavior when you've been bullied or harassed or having somebody saying hurtful things to you. And so they may not feel safe if your first instinct is to call the police. And so it's really important that the focus here be on the targeted person and what is the greatest service to them. This is, of course, subject to threats to immediate threats to safety, to physical dangers, right? But in a situation where it's verbal, it is a better practice to ask the targeted person, would you like me to call the cops? Do I need to call the cops now? And honor the wishes of that person in that moment. We have to kind of get out of our own heads and assumptions and move forward based on what our targeted person actually needs. Our fourth D here today is document. So this is predicated on also that there's not someone else taking action. One of the things that we noticed a lot when anti-Asian violence had escalated in the wake of the COVID pandemic was that there were several incidents where people were being attacked, physically even attacked, and there were many individuals around filming using their phones, but none of those people were willing to take action to assist the targeted person, right? We had 5 different camera points of view. In none of those videos was someone willing to either square up to a harasser or to do any of the other 5 intervention strategies that were available to them at that time. And so document is helpful if someone is already taking action. Some things to know about how to film effectively so that that footage could be helpful to a targeted person in the event that they need to take legal action or in the event that they need to view that footage again, maybe for medical purposes or just so that you need evidence of what actually happened. Try to film in a way that you capture as much of the scenery as possible so that the incident could be recreated in both space and time. So if you can capture how bright it is outside, where exactly you're located, orient yourself using landmarks or buildings or street corners. If you can avoid extraneous commentary, except when it's to clarify what's happening on a video, and if you can film horizontally rather than vertically, because that format is a lot easier to review again on a computer screen or on a television screen if that becomes necessary. And while filming, documenting in this manner is really helpful, we also need to really keep in mind, what does the targeted person want done with that footage? Sometimes people who are being targeted in this manner are not acting their best selves, right? And maybe they don't want footage of themselves getting screamed at in a grocery store and then screaming back. They maybe don't want that on Facebook Live for their entire friends and family and coworkers to see. And so think about it. What is the value of going live or of posting this footage compared to the harm that you might be doing by sharing a targeted person without their permission? So documenting can be really, really important, and especially in a time when everyone has a cell phone usually like right on you, like you're really ready to go. Think through what you are going to do with that footage. For what purpose have you chosen this intervention strategy? And if you have chosen this intervention strategy, what are the things that make it more effective, more helpful, and less harmful, perpetuating less harm to our targeted person? And the final D in our intervention strategies is delay. And I want to be really clear, this does not mean delay your action, delay taking action, delay doing something. It means delay the harm. Sometimes, if we're not able to respond in the moment for whatever reason, we can still delay further harm from an incident by just acknowledging that it happened. Just being real with the person that, oh my gosh, that was awful what he said to you. Are you okay? Asking what resources are available to them and if they would like help accessing those resources. Even a small acknowledgement like rolling your eyes to show commiseration with something ridiculous that somebody's done, even just a smile can really help someone to feel less isolated, less traumatized, and it will delay the psychological harm from them having had this experience in the first place. And so again, this is not delaying your action, it is delay in terms of delay future harm by acknowledging that something has happened, that it was not okay, and that you saw it and that you agree that it wasn't okay. So that was the 5 Ds of bystander intervention that apply in a public act of harassment where you do not know the perpetrator, you do not know the victim, and you've deemed that it is physically safe to intervene. Now we're going to talk through some digital bystander intervention. So how many of you in this room have at least one form of social media? Okay, how many of you have more than 3 accounts on social media? Okay, I'm seeing some hands up. How many of you would say you spend a significant amount of time online? You can close your eyes and we can make this anonymous if you would feel more comfortable, but let the record reflect that it is a significant number of people who have a number of social media accounts or who spend a significant amount of time online. That's not bad. I'm not here to shame anybody. I am a millennial. I am chronically online, and that's my problem and not any of y'all's. But it is very important that we also are curating online spaces that show our values, that manifest the values of good community safety that we also believe in the real world. So that's why we talk about digital bystander intervention. The truth is that online culture is not going anywhere. Social media is not going anywhere. Across generations, genders, races, income, educational level, everyone is spending a pretty significant amount of time online. Whether we're honest about it or not, we collectively are spending over 2 hours daily on social media. The average is that Americans have over 7 accounts online, including email, social media, anything that you use to interact with other people. And so also a lot of Americans get their news from social media now for various reasons. The demographics of each individual social media platform might vary a little bit. You can see YouTube gaining in popularity among younger users because short form videos are the thing of the future, right? That's where everybody is migrating to. LinkedIn is kind of a mainstay for millennials and older folks, but we've got X and TikTok that are growing in influence and also in their capabilities. We can look at Instagram as being actually equal in terms of Generation Z and millennial usage, but regardless, social media is not going anywhere. And we can feel all kinds of way about social media, but the fact is it is here and it is probably here to stay. And so it is changing the way that we relate to each other, to the world, to the things that are going on in our communities. And so online culture is an important part of a lot of people's lives. It's got its pros and its cons, right? When used correctly, judiciously, social media can actually decrease feelings of isolation. It gives people ways to connect that might not be possible for them in the real world. It helps marginalized people in particular to find and build for themselves safe communities, safe spaces that might, again, be hard for them to access in the real world. But it is not all sunshine and rainbows over in social media land, right? A lot of people are increasingly reporting feelings of addiction to social media. The feeling of, I must be able to access it, and when I cannot, I actually feel symptoms of distress when I cannot access social media. It is being correlated to a higher risk of depression in adolescence, so it worries me a little bit, kind of what this is doing to the minds of our young people. And we see an overall lack of media literacy. How many of you have ever taken like a media literacy class? Okay. So like a few people have done that, but it's not something that's widely taught in like public school settings. It's not something that is widely comfortable or is widely familiar to many individuals, even though they are spending a lot of time online. And so our ability to distinguish between what is factually generated and what is perhaps faked or doctored or spread without context or just straight up like fabricated, our ability to do that is not as great as we perhaps might think. And so this algorithm-based content drives us into either echo chambers where we only interact with people with whom we agree, or it drives us into a space where we are constantly in conflict, viewing content that causes us distress because it causes us to continue to engage with the platform. And so while there are some great things that social media has done, it's raised movements, it's raised awareness, it's garnered thousands and thousands of donations for various causes all across the world, it is also not without its pitfalls, which is why digital bystander intervention, I think, is the answer to a lot of the problems that we see with online culture. So some mechanisms, some, not all, this is not an exhaustive list, these are just the ones that I think tend to be the most effective with digital bystander intervention. The first being to record and report. Every platform has its terms of service and usage, and all of them have prohibitions on certain kinds of threats, hate speech, other harmful conduct, which is not a violation of the First Amendment because the First Amendment applies to government actions, not private social media platforms, just to clear that up a little bit. But every platform has its terms of service, and if you view content or see someone using it in a way that violates those terms of service, you can record that behavior and you can report it to the platform. That will get platforms suspended or things put under review or shut down. It is not a catch-all by any means. The mechanisms by which things are evaluated for whether or not they violate terms of service are deeply, deeply flawed, and I think we can all recognize that. But it is one method of making sure that harmful content and behavior is not perpetuated online. It's just simply by using the terms of service of the platform itself against a person who is committing violations. We can also redirect, right? So if we see a hashtag or a social media platform that's being used to spread hurtful, harmful behavior, we can redirect it and use that same platform or those same language, even those same tags, to do something that is funny, supportive, or just silly, right? There was a racist hashtag that was going viral on Twitter a few years ago, and K-pop fans took over that hashtag and spammed the hashtag with videos of their favorite K-pop idols and just memes of K-pop idols. So when you search that hashtag on Twitter, you no longer saw the racist content, you just saw a whole bunch of K-pop. K-pop fans are not to be messed with these days, and I don't know if y'all realized that, but I did not until quite recently, and it was like, oh wow, okay. Hateful rhetoric that's targeting our vulnerable community members can be drowned out with messages of love. So this image that I'm sharing with you here was taken on the occasion of some very hurtful things that had happened by a state representative who had called members of the Muslim community enemies and terrorists. And many people in the interfaith community responded to the news of that by saying, our Muslim family and friends are hashtag not my enemy, sharing positive stories about their interactions with members of the Muslim community with this hashtag not my enemy. And so rather than, they were able to redirect the energy from singling out members of the Muslim community and focusing that energy, focusing the redirection on sharing all of these really positive, wonderful stories. This is a really, really important point for us to consider when members of our Muslim community, as well as our Jewish friends and neighbors, are facing heightened levels of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish bigotry. And so where we see this kind of rhetoric being spread, it's very important that we take action, whatever action is available to us. This kind of redirection, I think, is great because it gives us a positive feeling of engagement in online culture. It seems to be proactive rather than reactive or defensive, and it's a way for you to share positive stories and engagement and positive experiences with your social circle. So again, we're curating an online space that reflects our values, such as values that say, Muslims are not my enemy. You can also target a harassing person. Sometimes that's the only method of holding someone accountable, is to say, hey, you are saying all of these things online from behind a keyboard, but we can find you. We know where you work. We maybe know who you associate with. We can find your family or your friends. We could take screenshots of the harassing things that you're sending and send them to like your mom or your grandma or maybe your boss. You know, there was a series of incidents that went viral a couple of years ago wherein a young man was sending some very hateful, misogynist messages to various women on Instagram. And this woman was collecting all of them, and she took screenshots of all of them and sent them to his mother and said, hey, you might need to know, you might be curious to know that your son is talking to people like this on social media. And the mom was aghast. I had no idea. I did not raise him like this. You can promise. You believe me when I say that there will be consequences for this behavior. Within 24 hours, the accounts were all suspended. And little 16-year-old did not get to spend his time on Instagram sending misogynist memes to people who didn't ask for them. So you can hold a harasser accountable in this fashion by finding out kind of more about who they are. However, it is very important that we do not do this unless you know for sure that it's accurate. We cannot be responsible for doxing people, for putting them in positions of danger if they are not the ones who are actually behind harassing behavior. You have to think very, very carefully, is this the appropriate response to what's going on? It is not always. There are times when this is appropriate and there are times when it is not. But I do want to mention it because sometimes it is a really good way of holding someone accountable. Also be aware in this targeting process that reposting harmful content, for example, sharing something that comes from a hateful website or from an account who's just churning out trolling content that's hateful, engaging with that actually gives it more of a platform. So rather than sharing something directly, like directly quoting a tweet, which causes more people to then view the profile, think about doing other things like taking a screenshot so that you're not driving more engagement to that page, or using a service like a do not link service that stops that website or that content creator, that platform from getting those clicks. What happens online stays online forever, and it does not matter if it disappears automatically due to a function of the app. It doesn't matter if you delete the content. It doesn't matter if it's been like shadow banned or it's just been, it lives forever. Someone will take screenshots. There will always be receipts. Even when you think there's no receipts, there will be receipts. And sometimes, to be completely honest and frank with all of you, because I feel like you're my friends here, there are things that I said and did as a young person that I'm really glad I didn't have social media for it to be, immortalized for the entire rest of my adult life. That stuff did not have to follow me forever. That is not true today. And so our young people, and also our older people who maybe did not grow up in this culture of online engagement, need to be reminded that what happens online is forever. It does not go away. It does not get erased ever. And so behave online in a way that you would also be proud for your grandmother to know about it. Unless your grandma's not a great person, and then someone else in your life. Would somebody be proud of you for the way that you behave online? I like to think that my grandmother, although she refuses to use email or Wi-Fi or social media, I like to think that I act online in a way that she would be proud of me, which to me means something because my grandma's a pretty awesome lady. So think about that. Is this something that you would want your family members, your colleagues to be doing or seeing? And if not, what are we doing here? Finally, we support targeted people. We know that, for example, women are 2 times as likely as men to experience harassment online, and particularly gendered harassment in a way that can be very, very nasty and detrimental to your well-being. We know 1 in 3 children report having experienced hate speech either directed at themselves or at other people online. That is an astonishing number of children who are viewing hate speech who may not have the proper context to understand what it is. And so whether it's by privately messaging someone who's been the target of hate or by publicly sharing like positive thoughts, just like we talked about in the Not My Enemy hashtag, we can support people who are experiencing this kind of harassment, and we can, again, stop that harm, we can stop that hurtful behavior, disrupt these cycles of hurting each other online, and we can curate an online culture that is better for everybody. So that all of those positive features of social media that we talked about earlier are accessible and open to everyone who is using social media. So, interpersonal conflicts, or as I like to call it, how to ruin Thanksgiving dinner. I'm sure, I am positive that all of us in this room have been at some form of function, whether it's a family dinner or a work function or just a community event, and we have heard somebody say something that just made us cringe. We've all been there. And maybe we knew how to act in the moment, and maybe we didn't. That is okay. I'm going to talk through some guidance on interpersonal conflicts because I think it's really important how we manage to stay friends with somebody, how we manage to have relationships with people while still not tolerating hurtful behavior or harmful language or acts. So let's talk about how are we going to ruin Thanksgiving dinner. First of all, this is predicated on the fact that you know the person who is perpetuating harmful behavior. And I kind of like this image because these two guys look like they might be brothers. And brother in the red shirt might be like harassing and picking on the other brother for whatever reason. And so these are different strategies for intervention when the perpetrator is someone with whom you have some sort of relationship. And to start off with, it's not just a joke. So there is a type of humor called disparaging humor. And this is a form of humor that is referred to often as punching down, perpetuating harmful power structures, or basically eliciting amusement by the denigration or belittlement of a target, whether that target is an individual or a group of people or a series of characteristics. It is basically humor that reinforces structures of oppression by punching down on the people who experience more of the oppression on that spectrum, okay? So this is a form of prejudice that, if we let it be tolerated, actually supports more active forms of prejudice. If we think about, you might have seen a graphic that's frequently talked about in some of these trainings, which is like the pyramid of oppression, right? And what the pyramid of oppression is, it talks about how at the top of the triangle are physical acts like murder, like assault, like physical violence or damage to property or arson. But the tip of the pyramid is supported by actions and behaviors that are tolerated from the base up. When we tolerate denigrating humor, this kind of disparaging humor, it allows us to then tolerate other forms of prejudice, like discrimination, like hateful speech, like verbal threats or harassment, things that lead to the kind of bullying that we've been talking about through this presentation. And so then a bully gets to further target their victim by saying, oh, not only did you not think my joke was funny, you're just so sensitive. It's just a joke. I didn't really mean it. And so it's really, really important that we not let bullies escape into this excuse of it's just a joke. Because if the key thing here is if a joke's not funny, you don't have to laugh at it. You do not have to let someone continue to perpetuate harm under the guise of, well, I'm just kidding. You just can't take a joke. So I really like that we can talk about this first, because that is often the first defense of a bully, is to say, oh, I'm just teasing, it's just a joke, don't be so sensitive. And this is why it's just a joke doesn't fly. This doesn't work. So speaking up when it's hard. Here are some examples of how we can speak up if we are witnessing or observing harmful behavior from someone with whom we have a personal relationship. Starting with setting boundaries. This is very similar to like the direct method of bystander intervention when it's two strangers. But setting boundaries basically says, do not do X behavior or I will do Y. So For example, we don't talk like that about other people in this house. I have rules in my household that certain language or certain things are not acceptable. And if you want to come to my house and be my guest and eat my food and drink my drinks and things like that, then you are not allowed to use hurtful language, right? You are not allowed to use slurs against other people. And if you do that in my home, you will be asked to leave. Thankfully, I have not ever had to set this boundary in motion. I have not ever had to enact that upon any guest to my home, but it is a very clear, because people know me, that that is not behavior that I would tolerate under my roof. Another example is if you're going to say things like that, the kids and I are just going to have to leave. The important thing about setting these boundaries is that you then must hold to them, right? It does you no good to set a boundary and then have it be trampled upon and not do anything, right? So the key here is that if you are setting a boundary, it needs to have a concrete, action-reaction. If you do this, then I will ask you to leave. If you continue to say this, I will remove myself from the situation. And then you stick to it, although it's really hard. This is a very, very effective method of managing these kind of interpersonal relationships, although it can also be uncomfortable. We can also ask questions. Sometimes asking people where they heard something or why they would say that can be a really effective method of disrupting that harm. I particularly like making people explain their jokes to the point that they then have to zero in on why the joke is funny. This happened to me fairly recently in an interpersonal relationship where someone told a joke that it was not a funny joke. And I said, I don't get it. I'm just, I'm a woman, I'm so silly, just please explain to me the joke, I'm not getting it. And he was like trying to explain it, and finally he got so frustrated and he was like, it's funny because women are stupid. But he had to say that in front of everybody, and so everybody in that situation was like, they were looking anywhere else, and they were scooting away from him. They didn't want to sit with him. They didn't want to talk to him anymore. And I said, oh, okay, And we moved on from the conversation because I wasn't going to make him stew in it forever. But just asking someone, explain to me why your joke is funny. And then they will have to drill down to the point that the joke is funny because racism or sexism or homophobia, right? And then you've diffused that joke. You've taken away all of its power, because then they have to admit that the joke really isn't funny. That the joke or the humor is about hurting other people, and they have to admit that out loud to themselves and to everyone around them. And so asking questions gently can be a really great probing way, both in a serious way and also in a humorous way, of deflecting and diffusing a harmful, hurtful situation when it's somebody with whom you do eventually want to have an interpersonal relationship in the future. You can also enlist help. You might be astonished to find that other of your family members are dreading this dinner because they don't want to listen to Cousin Pete, or they don't want to listen to Grandpa ranting about whatever it is this weekend. You might not be the only family member who is like, oh my God, I just don't want to listen to this anymore. So get some help. Ask some people to be your backup, right? If you are in a partnered relationship, ask your partner, your spouse, hey, I really need you to back me up when this happens. I really need you to help me set and hold to these boundaries. Or let's address these comments when she makes them next time. What do you think? What could you say? What could I do? It can always be helpful to have a team around you when you're trying to intervene in a family member or a friend who is saying or doing hurtful things. You can also deflect. This is really similar to the distract technique that we talked about in our bystander intervention earlier. But what I really like to do, one that I love is, wow, did you hear about that game last night? And they'll go like, what game? Any game. I'm sure there was a game on last night. Let's talk about that instead, right? Somebody somewhere knows about a sports game last night, and probably they want to talk about it. So let's talk about that instead of whatever weird thing your uncle wants to go ranting about. You can also distract by just leaving the room. Oh, gotta go do something anywhere else other than here. Or, oh, looks like everybody's out of iced tea. Let me collect all the glasses. Let me go in the kitchen, I'll get the pitcher. I'm gonna make sure everybody's topped up. Oh, you need some more sugar, your tea's not sweetened. Oh, I got you, we're gonna take care of that. We're deflecting, right? Because then the person who wants to continue using that harmful language or having this toxic conversation, they become the one who has socially transgressed when it's really obvious that you are trying to do an obvious subject change. You have displayed to everybody in the room like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Do y'all want to do this anymore? You've given them a way to join you in your team to get help. And now the person who wants to drill in on the toxic conversation, they are the person who's being the problem, right? You've pointed out that it's their behavior that's unacceptable. So the deflect one is something that's often available in a way that allows you to sort of maintain those relationships. A blank stare and a very obvious subject change. Just keep trying to talk about that game. Just keep trying, you know? Was it baseball? Was it basketball? Was it football? Was it rugby? I'm sure there was a game on somewhere. You know, what about the one that was last week? And that was crazy, right? Just obvious subject change. Keep trying, because chances are that someone else will join you, and now you have a team around you who's gonna help you get out of that situation. It's always really important to echo when someone else takes action, because again, we want to form that sense of community investment so that when someone is doing something that we appreciate that is disrupting harm, we are joining their team, even just by saying thanks. Hey, you're so right. That's a great point. Or I agree with Cousin Pete. You know, that's not a very nice thing to say about other people. You're showing solidarity both for the people who are being targeted by the language and the other people around the table who don't want that toxic conversation to continue. So you're doing the echo function to bolster your sense together that we don't have to make this family dinner go the way that Grandpa clearly wants it to go. And then if you are in a position of being responsible for young people, this is a great way also of ending these situations, of deflecting harm, of disrupting hurtful cycles. It's not okay to say things like that when my kids are around, right? If you've got kids, you are their parent, you are allowed to set boundaries, you're allowed to make rules for what is acceptable around your children and what is not acceptable. And so this is similar to holding boundaries, but you're using your kids as the reason that these are not the values that I want my kids to absorb. And then you're not setting a good example for the kids. A lot of, especially older folks, tend to really respond well to we're not setting a good example for the little ones. And so that's also something that's very safe to say with the little ones themselves around. But appealing to the kiddos, to the next generation, the glorious task of educating young minds and raising up the new generation of leaders of the future, that is a great way also to call somebody in if their language or their behavior is harmful, if they are doing hurtful things. And again, it does require you to be able to hold those boundaries firm. If this is not okay when the kids are around, then if you're going to keep doing it, then the kids are not going to be around anymore, and you got to hold on to that line. You got to hold that line, stick to that boundary, but it is a very effective way at disrupting the way that family members will sometimes try to perpetuate these harmful cycles when your kids are around. So to wrap up why we're all here, you all came to this training because you wanted to learn about bystander intervention. Maybe you wanted to learn what it is, maybe you wanted to learn about the history and the culture, but I would bet that for most of you in this room, you're here because you want to learn how to be a bystander who intervenes. You do not want to sit by passively when harmful or hurtful things are happening in our community. You might also be here because your boss brought you here, but I am grateful for you nonetheless. And so I want you to feel a sense of investment in community as you wrap up this training. We do have a handout for you to take home with you. It's a little bit of homework. It's just one page. It is very easy, I promise. And I will not know if you do it. So this is on our system. This is me trusting all of you to be invested enough in the training today to want to follow it up. All of the strategies that we've talked about require practice. And something that I remember from having taught this training many times is that what I like to do when we have sufficient time and space is I like to divide people up and then give them practice scenarios to practice the intervention strategies. And the interesting thing is that in every training I've ever done, we've done this on purpose. Somebody will be the bully or the harasser, someone will be the targeting person, and then someone will be the one practicing their intervention. In almost every single scenario, the person who's the intervener says, it was so hard. I knew it was fake. I knew it was set up. I knew the people around me. They're my friends, my sisters, my family. But it was still really hard to do it, even in a simulated scenario. But they also told me it's easier the more I practice. And so if you have people around you with whom you can practice these strategies, your retention will be better, and your ability to act in the moment, to overcome all those cognitive stops, that will improve when you practice these strategies. This is part of investing in yourself being a member of a safe community, We've learned the techniques, we've talked through the structures, but you have to practice putting it into action. And so that is my task for you today, is to take this homework home and to read it as I am inviting you in. I'm inviting you to be a part of a community where we don't let harm happen to other people and we don't sit passively by when others are bullied or hurt. Whether we know those bullies, whether they're across a keyboard thousands of miles away, whether they're strangers on the street, we do not stand by and let harm be perpetuated in our families, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our networks. That's why we're all here, is that we are investing. I'm inviting you to invest in this vision of a community where all of those things, that all of the safety, the justice, the equity, the civil liberties, the protection of civil rights, all of that becomes true for every single individual who lives in our community. And so when one person stands up and says, hey, this is wrong, it helps other people to do the same. I'm encouraging you, I'm inviting you, I'm hoping that you will join me in being the person who stands up and says, that's not okay, and I'm going to do something about it, because by doing that, you are helping other people to also stand up and say, it's not okay. And then we will make a world together, the world that we want to live in, the change that we want to see, where people are all safe and live healthy, safe, equitable lives of liberty. So if you wouldn't mind, please take out your devices and take our post-training survey so that I can help evaluate the extent to which this was effective or helpful for you at all. I'll leave this QR code up for just a moment. I want to give a special thanks to my colleague Cindy, because she helped me create this training, the first versions of this training that we ever did. And there are also several other resources that I pulled heavily from in creating this training. You can take a picture of these. In particular, I want to highlight right2be.org, which is an anti-street harassment nonprofit, tons of online resources about active bystanders and about bystander training. And then, of course, Cindy Nguyen, who is now the Policy Advocacy Director at ACLU Oklahoma. And then there was a cartoon that I had shared originally and took it out. But it's a cartoon about bystander intervention and specifically the distract method that I would encourage you to check out. But that is the conclusion of my training. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for spending this time with me today. I thank you for attending the meetings of the Human Rights Commission and for listening to this message and for believing in an Oklahoma City, an Oklahoma, a country, a world where we are all safe and happy and healthy. Thank you so much. And yes?
Yeah, one of the things you hear quite often is an underhanded way of perpetuating this racist and other kind of behavior, especially by politicians, is to say something like, we're too politically correct. So what is a good, snappy comeback for indicating that people should be politically correct because there's a need for it?
Sure. That's a great question. So our friend here asked if people are trying to deflect attention from their harmful conduct by saying we're too politically correct, what might be a response to that? I would maybe ask, what do you mean by politically correct? And really kind of drill down to like what people mean when they say we're too politically correct. Because what people often mean when they say that is that they're not allowed to just say whatever they want with impunity. Or they mean that they're not allowed to use language that they know is hurtful, that they've been called out on before, and they don't like the discomfort that comes with being called out for that kind of thing. So I would consider like the asking questions of what do you mean by politically correctness? What do you think is too much politically correctness? Like, what is the appropriate amount of kindness that you think is acceptable in our community? And I particularly like asking someone, what is the appropriate amount of political correctness that you think we should be exercising here? And what does it mean to you? You will learn a lot about someone's values by asking them how they feel, like what that term really means. I don't know if there's like a particularly snappy comeback. I'll open that up to the rest of the room if anyone has something they would like to share. But I like for people to be specific in their language. You know, I'm an attorney, and so I really like to get people to drill down on, what do you mean by that? Can you define that for me? Can you be more clear about what you mean? You say too much political correctness. Like, is there is there any amount of political correctness that is appropriate and to you and why? And making them really examine it and then have to explain it with other people around. It's really effective if there's other people around and they have to be like, well, I don't like that I can just, yeah. So that is one method that might be available to you. What other things would you like to talk about? Questions, comments? Yes?
In the same boat for you, I'm also a 5'1" woman. And there's been a lot of situations where I've wanted to intervene, and a lot of situations where I have, where then afterwards a lot of people in my life have been like, hey, don't intervene in that way. You are not safe to do that, when like a man or literally anyone else would have been safer doing so. So how are you supposed to balance that when you know that you would like to do something, but you don't necessarily know if you can?
Yes, that is a great question. So our friend asked, as a woman who doesn't always feel physically safe or has been told that she's not physically safe, to use some of the direct intervention strategies, how do you balance your own personal safety with wanting to intervene in these situations? Am I asking? So the reason that there are 5 strategies is that it is understood that like direct confrontation is just not available to everybody, right? That maybe you could distract by dropping your drink or by asking a targeted person a question in a way that does not put you in that position of now being like the target for the harassing person. You can also delegate by asking people around, hey, you look like a pretty big guy. Would you mind like helping me say something about this? Do you see this? This isn't cool to me. Is it cool to you? So there are other things that might be available to you. I will also say that I did a version of this training for one of the library branches. And one of the librarians, I will never forget this, she said, I'm like 65 years old. She uses a cane to get around, and she's like, I got nothing left to lose. So like direct intervention, like bring it on. What he's gonna do, he's gonna knock down a little old lady, and she was like the most ready to go person I've ever talked to. It was amazing. And so a lot of it is just also like about the energy that you bring, like the mess around, find out kind of energy. This woman was so ready for someone to mess with her. I think she was just looking for a reason. And she was not a physically imposing person either. And so I think that a lot of it just comes down to what is the individual scenario, what is my individual comfort level, and what else is available to me, what other tools in my toolbox can I pull out before I have to put myself in that direct confrontation and potentially put myself at risk. Because again, we're not ever asking someone to get hurt, to put themselves in front of a bullet in harm's way, anything like that. Use the tools that are available to you at your disposal, at your best judgment. But there might be some things that are more available to you than you think. Great question. What else would you like to talk about? Anything else that we can talk about? Comments, questions, compliments? I take those too.
Rhonda, yes. One of the most heartbreaking experiences I have had along these lines is watching a child be degraded and harassed by someone who looks like a caregiver. So there's so much ambiguity there and delicacy in intervention. What's the best way to approach that?
That is a great question. So the question was, what about if I see a situation where a child is being berated or bullied or treated harshly or abusively by a caregiver? I would consider the extent to which the behavior falls into the realm of abuse, and then you might want to look at the delegate step to see what kind of professionals or observers might be amenable to a report of that kind of behavior. I know that that's not always the method that people really like. It's probably not the only thing that's available, but I might consider, is there an authority that you could call and say, hey, I witnessed this behavior and I'm really concerned about the welfare of this child. Another thing that you could also consider is that while it may not be safe for you to directly intervene in that parent-child relationship, you might be able to use the delay method of intervention, maybe just by smiling at the child. Or just as you walk by, oh, your kid's being so good, Or sometimes if it's if you feel like the behavior might be coming from an overwhelmed parent, a very stressed or frazzled parent. I don't know how many people are parents in the room, but I'm sure you have come to those moments with your kids where you were like, I'm about to lose it. And I'm sure that the parents in the room have had moments where you're like, I'm pretty glad that no one's around to see me right now. And so you might think that if you feel like that's coming from a place of this is a very overwhelmed parent, hey, mama, you're doing great. It just kids, right? Toddlers. Just acknowledging that like she is maybe not being her best self in that moment. Maybe the toddler is not, or the child is not being their best self either. You might be able to do the delay of harm by acknowledging that like this is a situation that no one really likes, right? No one is happy here. You're not happy, parents not happy, kids not happy. Acknowledging that, hey, let's bring the tension down a little bit. Like, your kid's adorable. I get that they're being a terror, but it's okay. It's all going to be okay. I read this really beautiful essay from a mom just recently who talked about an experience that she had in the grocery store where her 3-year-old was being a holy terror, right? Just had pulled some stuff off the floor and was just, was the on the back kicking and screaming tantrum, and she really needed to go grocery shopping for her infant who was at home with dad. And she was just so frazzled and so frustrated, and she said, there were 2 things that happened to me that day. One was that a person walked by and scoffed at us and made a mean face and said, and just made it very, very clear that I was a failure, that my kid was a problem, that they were just disgusted with all of this. The second thing that happened, though, was that another mom stopped by her and could tell that she was on the verge of tears and said, hey, mama, I got you. You're doing okay. Can I help you pick up? Just helped her pick up the stuff that her kid had thrown on the floor, distracted the kid a little bit to get her to calm down, and then just vanished. Just said, you got this, you're doing okay, and just left. And did not make a big deal out of it, did not ask for anything in return, didn't want to be recognized or acknowledged at all, just gave her a little bit of help and walked. And there was this beautiful kind of essay about the struggle of being a mom like that and dealing with these kinds of things. So again, while direct intervention strategies may not be crucial in that moment, they may not be the best thing, you could absolutely delay harm through just a little act of kindness, or if you feel like the harm is really escalating to the level of abuse, I would consider that delegation and see who's around to take a report, what authority might be there to help you do that disruption if you don't feel able to do it in that moment. That's a great question, though. I really love that question. Yes?
I think it's important in also response to that question to recognize that in a very diverse society that we live in, that we may interpret things as being toxic or harmful that really aren't because of cultural differences. So to give you a quick story, my father immigrated from Iran in 1978, and I didn't get a chance to meet my family in Iran and travel there until I was in middle school, so it was in the mid-1990s. And I never forget the first time I met my family, my father sitting around with his brothers and sisters, and they're speaking very loudly, and almost like yelling. And I went to my mom and said, why are my aunts and uncles and dad yelling at each other? And so she went and asked my father to explain. He said, we're not yelling, we're just having a discussion. This is normal, right? So cultural differences, that's not to excuse a bad situation when it comes to the interaction between parents and children, but it's also important to know that if someone's speaking in a different language and it may sound like they're yelling at a child, that may also be a very normal and acceptable behavior culturally that the child or the parent would interpret in a negative fashion. So I think it's also important for us to be aware of who we're dealing with in a certain situation, because I've seen situations in which things are misinterpreted and then people also end up getting discriminated against by authorities when things are reported. So I think we just also have to be very aware of that as well.
That's a really great point. Yes?
And 3% of all children are on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Visible and invisible disabilities,
Sure.
visible
Yeah.
intellectual disabilities, and sometimes when you see that out without the child or mother or caregiver, you might want to think, well, maybe that child's a bit overstimulated, or maybe that child needs an out, they're hungry, or they just have enough of this.
That's a great.
They're doing their best. They do need that smile, because caregivers of children in that circumstance need a village and a whole community to come out and really understand that.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And for the purpose of recording, just to kind of restate what our friends have said, it's been pointed out very, very appropriately that there are cultural differences in the way that parents and kids relate to each other. And so something that you may be reading as a toxic or even abusive interaction might be a perfectly normal one that you are just not familiar with, like the language or the tone or the body language of parent and child. And so we do have to be aware of that. And then our friend here also really pointed out, very, very graciously, that there are some children in these situations who are on the autism spectrum or may have other needs that cause them to act in public in a way that may be unfamiliar or different. And so it may not be, they may be overstimulated, they may have just had enough. And so we need to be careful about how we read those situations and not expose our neighbors to further abuse just because we've jumped to an incorrect conclusion. So as you can see, bystander training is full of nuance because we live in a culture, we live in a society with people that are full of nuance, that are never as predictable as we would perhaps like for them to be. But I do hope that you feel a little bit more empowered with the tools that we've talked about today, because the feeling I want you to leave with is just one of empowerment, that you don't have to sit passively when harmful things are occurring, no matter who's perpetuating them and no matter who's the victim. I just want you to leave with a sense of like, I have something available to me to where I don't have to just tolerate it and sit there. There is something that I can do. And even if maybe in the moment I freeze up, that is okay, because I'm going to think through what I might do in the future if it happens again. So before I close, I'd love any other questions, comments, or thoughts that you have. If there's a question or something that you don't want to share with the group, the commissioners have my contact information. I am more than happy to reconnect with you privately, because I just want this information to be as relevant and as helpful and as constructive to you as possible. So anything else before I leave you for today? Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.